Imagine a journey that sets out by boat from Toronto and sails the entire coastline of this vast country of ours. Seems impossible, and yet that's exactly what the Canada C3 expedition did to commemorate the country's 150th anniversary. Its final stop was in Victoria, British Columbia at the end of October, and that's freed up two of the people who were on that excursion to join us tonight. Geoff Greene, who founded and led the expedition. He's also founder of Students on Ice, a polar education program, and Sarain Fox, a C3 Journey participant, who is an Indigenous activist and the host of Rise on Viceland TV. And it's a delight to have both of you off the water and into our studio here tonight. Great. We should just remind everybody, it's C3, Expedition C3, coast to coast to coast, C3. That's what the C3 stands for. And let's just, Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up here as we start and just remind everybody what this is about? 3 coasts, 25,000 kilometers, 150 days. And let's just bring the map up and show you what 75 communities around the world's second biggest country looks like. That is one heck of an expedition. Okay, Sarain, you get comfortable for a second because I need to talk to Geoff off the top just to get some background in place. Where'd you get the idea for this in the first place?
Just looking at the map of Canada.
Come on.
Yeah, really. It was, I mean, it's, in a way we poured 20 years of experience from Students on Ice into the project, but most of that time's been spent on the Arctic coast, the longest part of our coastline. And staring at that amazing map of our country, it just seemed like a no-brainer to do a journey that would connect all 3 of our coastlines. In fact, all 4 of our coastlines, if you include the Great Lakes. Right. So on the back of a napkin one afternoon, about 2.5 years ago, the whole plan got sketched out, and it came to 148 days.
And that's, I mean, okay, here's what we got to get into. How did you have any clue how long it would take?
Well, just lots of experience over the last 25 years leading ship-based expeditions all over the world. So it's fairly easy to plot out a course and how far you travel every day, and yeah, it wasn't that hard. I mean, that was just the beginning, but then it evolved and became way more.
Well, that's what I would think. Like the logistics on this just have to be awesome, aren't they?
Looking back on it now, I'm shocked how complicated it was, and
for example,
how much went into it. Well, the logistics of taking an icebreaker, finding an icebreaker for starters, and we wanted to make sure it was a Canadian flagged ship and ice class, and there's about 2 of those, apart from Coast Guard, in existence. And then putting a team together, all the logistics, all the provisioning.
How big a team?
Oh, in the office we had 25 people full-time working on the project.
Over what period of time?
Over a 2-year period.
My goodness. And what was the point of it all? What did you want to accomplish?
Well, we wanted to celebrate Canada 150. That was the original concept, and it was a signature project for Canada 150. But that was a bit of a naive concept, as it turned out, because once we got going, we realized, well, A, there's a lot we don't want to celebrate about the last 150 years. But also all these layers got added. Science became a really historic scientific journey with 22 different projects in partnership with 15 national institutions. It became a journey of youth engagement, of connecting to nature.
So it morphed into a whole new thing.
Diversity, inclusion, and then the biggest thing that got added was reconciliation. And I went to see Murray Sinclair, and in 10 minutes, the bells of the Senate were ringing, and he just looked at me, he's like, Geoff, this is a voyage of reconciliation. And he was right.
Huh. Okay, more on that in a bit. Let's get to some more mundane stuff. The budget. How much did it cost to do all this?
Well, we're still counting it all up, but roughly $10 million.
Where'd you get the money from?
About 2/3 from the federal government, from the Canada 150 Fund as a signature project. Mm-hmm. And then the rest, we went out and pounded the pavement, and we had over 100 different partners that provided both financial and in-kind support. It was, in that sense, it was an incredibly Canadian project because of the, from moms and pop shops to big corporations to philanthropists and NGOs.
We're going to bring some pictures up and actually show the ship that you traveled on, but tell us about it. We still call boats sheep?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a ship, not a boat. You can put a boat on a ship, but not a ship on a boat.
Okay.
And it's a former Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker, built in 1958, almost 60 years ago, actually. And it was decommissioned in 2008, 220 feet long, an incredibly strong, sturdy. It was the perfect platform, actually, for this project. It slept 60 people, including the crew. And it just was, it's still a very capable icebreaker, so that allowed us to go places that we otherwise could not have gone.
And people lived and worked on that ship for almost 150 straight days.
Exactly. Yeah, people came, and we divided the journey into 15 10-day legs. The crew and my team were on pretty consistently, but then these groups of participants, we call them, like Sarain, they would come on each leg.
Okay, you've given me a nice segue to get to Sarain here. At what part of the journey did you hop on that ship?
So I joined on leg 10 in Cambridge Bay.
Where's that?
In the north, above the tree line. And it was the furthest north I'd ever been when I arrived to dock, to meet the ship as it docked there, and yep.
Okay, then you're going to have to help us out more still with the geography here. The north being like north of Ontario or north of Yukon or north of where?
So north of Yukon, so we fly into Yellowknife and then go to Cambridge Bay from there.
Okay, I think we got a clip of this, right? We can show a clip here. This is Sarain, clip from you were on the 10th leg, is that right?
Leg 10.
Okay, leg number 10. Sheldon, fire away.
It's obvious now there was a conscious effort to bring people together that could learn from each other.
C'est les gens qui ont donné le ton à l'expérience.
I think a lot of people on this leg in particular really connected. The bonds and friendships that were formed between the participants were very, very profound and powerful.
Of course, the ocean, all of the scenery that we've seen has been so beautiful, but hearing the traditional stories of those places, that's been everything for me on this journey.
Now, while that clip was playing, you started laughing. How come?
A number of reasons. I think also to see yourself smiling, like I'm smiling in that video. I had such an incredible time, and to be quite frank and honest with you, I was so conflicted about whether I should go and whether I belonged on that ship.
Now, I knew that. What would the issue have been?
A number of things. So Canada 150. I'm an activist. I also work in the media, so this year has been a challenging year to navigate.
Because, well, as an Indigenous person, you don't think there's a hell of a lot to celebrate.
No, and also the amount of money spent on various things and the amount of money needed in our communities so desperately for things like mental health and clean water. And so I'm always trying to be authentic to who I am as an Indigenous person, but also very aware that being a part of a journey and knowing when you can be a part of a platform that allows you to raise your voice and to be a part of the conversation is really important. So I actually, right up until the day before, was conflicted. And then I was like, I'm doing this.
Now, what sealed the deal for you?
I have a friend, Dio, who was on the very first leg, or one of the first. First, yeah. And I had lots of conversations with her about her experience. And then also, I wanted to go to the north. I think you have to be able to connect with all of your people to truly understand what's going on. I'm from Batchewana Bay, so on Lake Superior.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is up there if you live in Toronto, but it's not the north.
Yeah, it's the gateway. We call it the gateway to the north.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's really not the north. To me, it's still sort of central Ontario if you really look at Ontario.
I guess on a map it is, but it feels like Northern Ontario from downtown capital city.
Exactly.
Okay, so you decided to go for it. You got on the ship, sorry. Can't make that mistake again, my goodness. At what point did you know you'd made the right decision?
Day one.
How come?
It was the leg with the most Indigenous participants so far. And I knew I had made the right choice because I landed at the airport and immediately connected with people I knew from my media world and also a young girl who I met earlier in the year from Nunavut Sivaniksivik, which is an incredible program in Ottawa. And the first thing she said to me was, "That was the most intense thing I've ever done. It's going to be really, really hard for you." She's like, "But this is the one place where people can't jump ship on conversations that you want to have."
Now, it's been a while since you were on the ship, and yet I can, I don't know you at all. We just met. You seem very emotional talking about this.
Yeah, I'm like really trying to fight tears right now.
I know. How come?
So many things. Pamela Gross, who is now running for office in the North since the time we were on the ship, or Jimmy, who we just saw, who was our bear guard. And, it's really easy to decide that you know exactly what's going to happen in any conversation. But what happened for me on that ship was that I had to trust a lot of things that were happening and trust in a lot of conversations. And since we got off the ship, I've also connected with some of the people who we were a part of this journey together, and people are changed. I'm changed. And as an Indigenous person, being around that many settlers and feeling terrified and angry, but also an incredible amount of compassion, I believe in the work that's being done, and I think that there is a future for us together, and it's really easy to just shut that out and to engage in the conversation only with my own people.
So you may not have been sold on the notion of reconciliation before the trip began, but you are now?
I'm not sold on the idea of reconciliation before truth. I think part of the TRC's entire mandate was that you must have truth before reconciliation can happen.
And we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. Reconciliation is the pretty part of the package, and that's where we all want to jump to. And that's a great way to frame the conversation. But what happened for us on this journey was a lot of truth speaking and a lot of people finding their own truth in the conversation.
Did you imagine that that would ultimately be the mission of the trip, somehow get to the truth?
I don't think you could have imagined what happened. It was a very emotional journey, and that feeling that Sarain shared about the apprehension of coming was quite common with all of the Indigenous participants. But what happened on board was very real, and we either laughed or we cried pretty much all day long, or we were in awe and wonder, and it was this mix of things that allowed for. We started calling the ship a ship of hope, because even through these difficult conversations and people hearing things in some cases for the very first time about the history of Canada, a very almost secret history in some respects, but a really painful history. A lot of people weren't prepared at first to learn that. And so and then having someone like Sarain on board, who is such an incredible spirit and communicator, and she would just jump into that conversation and say, well, no, this is really what happened, and this is, but everybody had an open heart and an open mind, and
everybody did. Yeah, nobody from the settler culture pushing back against the prevailing narrative of the day?
On that leg, on 99% of the time, no, I would say. It was amazing. And we had Canadians from every possible walk of life, from Canadians that are newcomers to Canada, scientists, youth, elders, Canadians with disabilities.
Okay, just because, Geoff, I'm a nitpicker on this. You did say 99%. So my ears, of course, picked that up, and I got to ask Sarain, was there 1% of tone deafness on that trip somewhere? Maybe more than 1% in your view?
Yeah, I think that it comes in layers, right? So I think people were open to the conversation, but how open was sort of where that variable came in. I think some people really put up walls to protect themselves. You have to imagine also you're stuck on this ship, you're getting hit with things that for some people they have no tools to unpack. And there's a new thing that people are talking about now called reconciliation fatigue from the Indigenous perspective, which I think is also a real thing, because part of the dialogue is that Indigenous people are expected to inform and help people unpack our truths quite often.
Tired of doing that?
Well, it's not that I'm tired of doing it. I think I feel like I have an obligation to do it, but I think there are a lot of people who feel like settler populations need to start to do their own work in figuring out the truth of this country and not just saying, well, I didn't know. You know, like it's 2017.
Shouldn't all be incumbent upon you to educate the rest of us? We need to assume some of that responsibility.
Yeah, but I will say that at the beginning of the journey, I had offered to smudge with everyone every day. And in the beginning, maybe 1 or 2 people smudged. But by the end of the journey, I had every single participant in the reconciliation room.
You should just take 20 seconds for those who don't know. Tell them what a smudge ceremony is like.
Yeah, so smudging is something that I've been doing my whole life. It's either done with sweetgrass or sage, so it's a natural plant. And when you burn it, we believe that it's just a way of cleansing your spirit and your mind. And
you take the smoke and you kind
I kind of imagine it like
yourself.
water. So I wash my hands with it and I put it over my head. So my mom always told me a little rhyme. It's to your eyes to see good things, your ears to hear good things, your mind to think good thoughts, and your mouth so that you're speaking good words, and then to your heart so you're feeling good things and walking in a good way.
Your mom is pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is very profound.
My mom is really cool.
That is very profound.
She's kind of a warrior, yeah. So.
Geoff, let's read this from the Globe and Mail. Here's Ian Brown writing back in October. He said, "This is the challenge of reconciliation, to make the white, non-Indigenous citizens of Canada face the fact of their country's past and its continuing racism. Reconciliation works in theory, but how does it work in practice? How do you make the perpetrators of the cultural genocide and their descendants empathize with the victims? How do you do that without making those descendants resent being blamed for a crime they feel they did not personally commit? Or does that even matter? How do you convince someone they have wronged you and then ask them to make room for you without making them want to walk away because you still need them?" Those are some awfully important and hard questions to answer. Yes. How do you think the trip helped get you some of the way down the road to answering those?
I think first and foremost, education. Just letting people know the truth and what did happen in this country over the last 150 years. A lot of Canadians still don't really know what residential schools were, what relocation of communities was all about, what the 60s scoop was. And so education is the first thing.
That's the truth part.
That's the truth part, but it's beyond that. It's storytelling, and storytelling is such a powerful tool, and so is experiential learning. So when you meet somebody like Sarain, there's a lot of non-Indigenous Canadians that are probably hard-pressed to say they've ever spoken to an Indigenous person, or at least in a meaningful way. So it's the direct contact, forming relationships, friendships. The storytelling, though, is, I think, fundamental. But on the education side, every Canadian should read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, at least the 94 calls to action. They should try to participate in a Kairos blanket exercise. Just get involved and learn. And at least if this is any example, when Canadians go through that, there's an awakening. And there's a big difference where, and Deo pointed this out on leg 2, she said, I felt like people knew and they didn't care. But when I've discovered they didn't know, but when they know, they care, that was a game changer.
That's an awakening, isn't it? That is a real awakening. Well, Sarain, here's the reality. We can't get 33 million Canadians onto a ship for 180 days to make this, phenomenon repeat itself. So how are we going to figure this out?
Oh, man. It's such a... I wish we could all take that journey, though, because there is something about seeing the North. I think in a place like Ontario, even, where we hold most of the Indigenous population in Ontario. People forget that. It's I think people walk by Indigenous people every day and they don't realize the situations that they're in. But in the North, it is mostly just Indigenous people living, like, thriving in their own territory, but the conditions are quite alarming. I think for me, the next steps, so I just finished a tour where I am the only Indigenous performer with a choir full of non-Native people, and we dance and sing the story of residential school. And what I've learned also from the dialogue, which is very similar to the dialogue on C3, is that people are interested in hearing the truth, but they have no idea where to start. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. And then there is that kickback of, this isn't my grandfather who did this. But the reality is that we all benefit from the same systems that were put in place in the 1800s that caused all of this trauma towards Indigenous people. So whether you were the child or the grandchild of someone who perpetuated this violence, you're still benefiting from the systems put in place today that are still advocating for the same kind of treatment for Indigenous people. Residential schools haven't ended in full, because there are more children in care now in social systems than were ever in residential school at its peak. So it's knowing that this isn't over, that we're still in the same situation and we have to change things. Reconciliation is about change, and it's about honoring your privilege and knowing what your privilege provides you with. And so I would say to most Canadians, you have to look at what you have. Because if you own a house, if you have a good job, if you have clean running water and your children are in a good school, well, you have all of those things because you are on unceded Indigenous territory. And that's a really hard fact.
And you are ahead of many, many Indigenous people in this country if you
Yes.
have those four things.
Yes. And you have to acknowledge that before you can say
once you
anything else. Sorry.
No, this is good, but I'm thinking of the person watching this at home, a non-Indigenous person watching this at home saying, okay, I'm with you. I acknowledge all of what you just said. Now what? What do you want me to do?
Well, I make it a part of my life every single day. And so people at home need to do the same thing. What does that mean? Well, most children go to school and the first thing that they hear is the national anthem. I would love that to change. I think the first thing children should hear every day is a land acknowledgement, and not just one that gets it out of the way, but a real in-depth conversation about the land in which that school, that learning environment
So
stands.
we acknowledge that this territory in the past belonged to, in the case of where we are right now, Mississaugas with a new credit,
Yes.
Haudenosaunee, other, okay.
Anishinaabe, yeah.
Anishinaabe.
We did that every single day.
You did?
On
Okay.
the journey. 'Cause every single day,
That's an easy
coast
one.
to coast
Every
to
school
coast.
could do that. That's easy.
It's so simple.
We're in different First
So we just got to
Nation.
do it.
But it's that narrative and that perspective, and those little things all add up, and that's one that started off our day, every day of that journey. But it got people thinking, and also thanking the Creator for a great day, or making a blessing of some sort. And the legacy room was a big. We had the first legacy room in the country, the Gord Downey Chani Wenjack Legacy Room,
Yes.
and that became a focal point of our day. And it'd be great to see legacy rooms across the country. They're starting to blossom in corporate headquarters. You could have one here in the TVO.
A legacy room being what?
Well, it's a safe space, a sacred place to basically bring people together, particularly Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. It was born from Gord Downey's Secret Path project, and the legacy room we had on the ship also gathered all these really meaningful gifts across the country, mostly from all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit places we visited, and it had a real power. And profound moments occurred in that room. It was a place where people really opened up and shared and learned and built trust and understanding. And I think if we can create more spaces like that, that's, again, just another chink in the armor that will move us forward.
Okay, we got a few minutes left here, and I want to tackle just a few more things. If people have seen the wide shot, they will see that. And that was an enormous icon, an enormously important icon in my childhood, and I'm sure the childhood of many. That's paddle. From paddle to the sea.
That's the real one.
That is the real one. Flip it over on its side so we can see the words on the, like, there it is. I just remember reading that 100 times as a child. How did you get your hands on that, and what did you do with it during the trip?
Just stuck into the Museum of History. Well, that's a film made by Bill Mason. It was nominated for an Academy Award. It influenced a generation of us, certainly me. And the Mason family are friends of mine, and when they heard about this journey to go sea to sea to sea, we thought, well, we should take paddle to the sea, to the sea, to the sea. And so we
did you actually put it in the water?
We put them in the water almost every day as we went around the country. The first day was actually here in Toronto Harbor. It was a really windy night, and we went out with a film crew, put them in the water, and it went under the Zodiac, and we couldn't find it.
Well, that's what I
And
would have been worried about, Geoff, because of course in the original story, Paddle gets separated
goes
from
over
his
Niagara Falls.
original carver, and you wonder if it's. You didn't worry about losing him?
I had a heart attack about 10 times because that would have cursed the whole expedition. But luckily, it was just stuck under the Zodiac.
Oh, good. Okay.
But it's a symbol of a canoe. We carried 2 real birch bark canoes as well, as symbols of how our country is connected by water. Mm-hmm. We're an ocean nation. We even wrote a song called "River of Nations," Nations of Rivers, Nation of Rivers, and it's also a symbol of reconciliation, because the metaphor being we all need to be in the same canoe paddling together, but every canoe needs constant repairing and patching, just like our country.
What a wonderful metaphor. What's next for you?
Well, I want to add to that one.
Please,
because
okay.
My mom says something really interesting when she's talking about reconciliation, and Geoff, you might take this one or leave it, but what she says is that what we have to do as Canadians and Indigenous people is not join the same boat. Mm-hmm. We need to pull up our canoe and stand in our canoe, maybe next to your ship, and you stand in your own ship. And we have to be willing to acknowledge that it's not the same boat that we're traveling on.
Isn't that interesting? We're in
But
2 different boats.
When we pull them up side by side, we can be in conversation and we can be in the same waters together, but we need to be allowed to stand in our own place and be acknowledged from that place.
I wonder if that's not just a fundamental, that's 2 different visions of the same place. Mm-hmm. That's one vision that says we're all in the same boat now, and there's another vision that says, well, no, actually. You have your boat, we have our boat.
Yeah.
We can travel together,
yeah.
We can go parallel journeys, but we're in separate ships here, kids.
I think
How do we get around that?
I think that's the more accurate one. And Marie Wilson also corrected me on that. She's one of the 3 co-commissioners of the TRC. And your mom is pretty cool.
We already established that.
I think that works. I mean, what's wrong with going in the same direction? Maybe some of us are in canoes and some are in kayaks and some are in icebreakers.
Yeah. Some are swimming. If you're Jimmy, you're just swimming in a survival suit.
That's true too. Yeah. Or Catherine McKenna, who joined us on the last leg and swam a kilometer in the ocean.
She did, eh? Mm-hmm. The environment minister.
She did.
We got a shot of that anywhere?
There's a whole video on CanadaC3.ca.
Is that right?
Yeah.
CanadaC3.ca.
I took paddle for my first swim. I went on to a stand-up paddleboard ride, and I got to have paddle, and then I tried to stand up fully and fell off, and so I decided to just swim. And it was great. It was great.
In what body of water did you do that?
That was in the Arctic.
Yeah, the Arctic.
Yeah,
was,
Northwest Passage.
Yeah.
She's tough.
Well, dry suits are amazing.
Oh, okay. All right.
I wasn't going to say that.
Sorry.
You didn't mention that. Okay, that's important.
Anyways,
that's important.
We did go for a polar dip, though. It was fantastic. And, Mary Simon and Mark
great Mary
Tewksbury,
Simon, yeah.
So many things happened on our journey where regular Canadians and fantastic Canadians who have been doing amazing things in their own worlds really connected as human beings. And for me as an Indigenous person, to see people make connections, not based on I have to do this thing for reconciliation or I have to do this for C3 in this journey, but just as human beings and seeing profound, deep connections happen really reminded me that you can't always be so militant about things. Sometimes you have to just be a human being and approach everything in life from that way, because that's the only way you access your true humanity.
I cannot thank both of you enough for coming in and sharing your views on what was clearly an unforgettable and life-altering journey that you both took along with so many others. Geoff Greene, the expedition leader, he's also been doing Students on Ice for many, many years. Sarain Fox, the participant, as they're called, and the host of Rise on Viceland. Thanks so much to both of you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.